In this video, we are going to take a general broad look at the basic brain function and structure. This is going to provide you a baseline set of information in order to move through the learning experience and understand different effects and happenings that go on in this magnificent piece of equipment we have in our heads. It begins with understanding the makeup. The brain is made up of tissue as well as nerve cells or neurons. Okay, so these aren't clear pictures of those things. It's just to give you a concept that those are the things going on in the brain. This is a neuron. This is what it looks like. They're very long. They follow each other in lines of connection, and they talk to each other, sending impulses electrically. There are two sections, the axon and axon terminals, which send information, and then the dendrites, or the dendrite areas, which accept information through their receptors. Now, the communication cannot happen by the axons and the dendrites touching because there is too much electrical energy, and if it were to happen, there would be some shorting out. We would have some really scary brain activity going on. So the section between the cells is called the synapse or synaptic cleft, and it keeps them happy to have that. But how do they talk with that great space in between? Simple. They use something called a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter is a chemical communicator. So these are things that carry specific messages from one cell to another, and it goes down the line of communication leading to action. Some of those neurotransmitters we will talk about quite a bit in this learning experience are dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine. These all cause us to feel and act based on their message. So let's say that you are spending the day with your favorite aunt, and when greeting you, she gives you a big hug. Now, our brain knows that this big hug wants to give us a comforting feeling, kind of an ah feeling. So your talking cell will call on serotonin, and it will fill up the axon terminals with the serotonin in order to send that message to have that comfort and to be happy. So once it fills up into the terminals, it's released out into the synaptic cleft, and it travels across that cleft, finding the different dendrites which have the receptors and sending that message by connecting with the receptors. The dendrites find them, receive the message that we want to feel comforted, and send that message on from cell to cell. They then release the neurotransmitters back into the cleft, which will be collected by the talking cell so it can use them later. This is called reuptake. In a way, it's like a vacuum that pulls those neurotransmitters back into the talking cell and stores them back away where they belong. Because we need these things more than one time. We're going to have another hug today, and we're going to want to feel good about it. So let's say what happens if you have some kind of deficiency. Let's say that I have a form of depression and I don't have as much serotonin as other folks have. What happens then? Does the message get sent? Well, let's say we have that same hug from that same aunt and we know we want to feel good. Our axon terminals send those neurotransmitters out, but they're not quite making a connection with as many dendrites as they need to because they don't have the time. So we need something to supplement and support us, and that's in the form of medication. So the medication will hold back that would-be vacuum and allow it time in the cleft to finally connect with those dendrites and send that message of feeling comforted. Oh, okay, out goes the message. And then the neurotransmitters are released back into the synapse and collected. This actual medication is called a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI. You may have heard of this before, but it's going to help you to see that there are some things that we can do to mold and change based on certain deficiencies. Now, the brain is a network of neurons, and it's just very intricate and grows and changes, and connections are made between these different nerve cells to make patterns. But although it seems kind of like chaos up there, there is a method to its madness. In the initial migration of nerve cells, each particular cell has a place it needs to go and a job it needs to do. That's determined by our genes and our DNA. So while you're in utero growing and developing, so are your brain cells. They're going to their spot, they're getting settled in, and they're ready for work. And there's a method to that madness. It all has a purpose and a point based on your genes. So what does all this mean about function? Now we know how these nerve cells talk, but how do they actually lead to some action? Well, here's a look at the brain. Here's a sagittal section, and by sagittal that means if you were to draw a line straight down your face, dot, 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 and open your head up like a cupboard, you would see the two different sides of your brain, and that's a sagittal section. Looking at this section, we see there are three parts to the brain. One is the brainstem. It is just what it looks like. The second one is the limbic system. That's up in kind of the center. We call that the feeler brain. And then there's that top cerebral piece where the prefrontal cortex and all other things lie about movement and sensation. So the brainstem, what's its job? I like to call it the monkey brain. Others call it a lizard brain or a brain base. But what goes on here are those instinctive processes that help us to stay alive and survive. So these are all of our innate needs and all of our primal needs. If you look at an actual lizard brain, it is mostly composed of just these things that are in our brain stem. Things that are controlled here: heart rate, breathing, body temperature, digestion, and that rapid response system that we have when we come across something that leads to that fight, flight, or freeze response. All of these things are managed in the brainstem, and all of them are understood and known about before birth. So what happens in the brainstem is there's this control center of sorts. And it's helpful if you look at it that way, because then you can start to understand functions which are on auto, which we're in charge of, and those kind of things. And I like to look at it like a panel of information with levers and buttons and alarms and all kinds of other things just to see what we do with it. Now, who runs this control center in the brainstem? It's run by somebody I like to call the man behind the curtains. Much like the movie Wizard of Oz, there is a small man behind the curtains just running this magnificent, great, and powerful Oz who has all of this power and influence. However, that man is essential to all of the power and influence in that great and powerful Oz, and that's exactly how it runs in our brain as well. This man is in charge of keeping us alive and keeping us functional. So on the right side of the control panel, we have some really specific things. The first side in blue you'll see is that breathing, heart rate, digestion, temperature thing. And let's say this guy is working. He is working from when you are in utero, and he has this stuff on autopilot by time you come out of the womb. He is ready to roll with this stuff because he knows that shortly thereafter are going to start coming life experiences, just bam, 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 right in a row, and he's going to have to know about those things. So this stuff is already preset for you, blueprints all executed. Once you're born, the development of the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus are essential. He needs these things to start working for him in the limbic system in order for him to really start moving forward and helping you to understand life experiences. All of these things are going to help him to do the rest of the job throughout your life. So let's take a closer look at the limbic system itself. This is just kind of a general picture of what it would look like structurally, and you'll see that everything kind of coincides with each other because they all really do work together. This limbic system is really the basis of our emotions and understanding of information. Piece 1, hypothalamus. This gathers sensory information from within your body and allows you to know what's important, what's not important, how to respond to it, have we seen it before, all of those things. Near the hypothalamus, we have the thalamus. This gathers sensory information from outside of the body. So it helps us to understand what's coming at us. Have we seen it before? Is it important? Do we need to know about it? All these things we see, hear, feel, and all of that other stuff. The thalamus is kind of the control center there. Another structure is the amygdala. The amygdala it works in the business of emotions. You're going to hear a lot about this when we talk about substances and things like that. People really like to talk about the amygdala because it kind of drives us to do what we want. But I have to say that the fourth section is even more imperative, and that is the hippocampus. Okay, this manages storage, patterns, and meaning. So it really helps us to filter all of those things that we do, and instead of having to think about each individual movement, it puts it into chunks of understanding, so we just start to do things automatically. It really helps us to free some space and time for life experiences. So the hippocampus is kind of the hub that holds everything together in that limbic system. Basically, the amygdala is kind of the star. People like to talk about it, they like to talk about how it drives us, but that hippocampus is back there as the songwriter or maybe the ghostwriter, just kind of working hard for us and we don't even know about it. So we talked about that base piece, but look at all this space on the top of that sagittal section we're looking at. What do we do with all that space? Well, we fill it with connections that help us with movement, sensation, creativity, critical thought, inhibitions, and all of those other higher order functions that we're going to need through adulthood. Now, that is a lot of stuff, and it's interesting to know, where is this guy's focus going to be with so much to do, manage, and build all the time? How does he choose? Well, it's broken into 3 major sections. The center of his panel is not particularly managed because this is the reticular activating system. That system that when something happens right now and you need to have some kind of an immediate response, it's an auto thing. It's got a big old button, do it or don't. Then we have on the right side of the panel the body and stimulus management that we learned from 0 to 2 years, right? So we have that brainstem stuff on autopilot, and we can accept and understand the limbic system as the next piece of that, and we can understand what agitates us and how we can respond to that, and we also really develop an attachment during this time. As we move forward from years 2 to 15, I know that's a big span, but we'll figure out why soon. When we move through this section of age, we're really taking in the life experiences and really understanding the day-to-day life. Now, the hippocampus does kind of send us cheat sheets. Here's a pattern, just take care of it. But all that new information we're taking in, we have to process through it emotionally. Finally, we've got that 13 or 15 to adulthood section. This is where we are really evolving in our conscious thought. We're making choices. We're taking risks. We're learning how to not respond immediately to every situation, either physically or verbally. And we're really starting to use that big functional piece of our brain. So in short, from 0 to 2 years, your focus is safety, your reaction is immediate, and your distress is usually based on physical need: pain, food, water, and nurturing. And you express it in the only way you know how: tactile feeling, hitting, or yelling, noise. From 2 to 13 or 15 years, depending on puberty, the focus is really feeling and relating to the world around you. Your reaction is still fairly immediate during this time, and your distress is usually based on perceived need. So sadness, anger, discomfort, food, water, sex, or nurturing needs. As you move from that 13 or 15 to adult, your focus is independence. You are usually using a calculated reaction, and your distress is based on food, water, sex, or nurturing needs, or physical danger. And we express those things in much more complex ways than hitting or yelling. Now, the man behind the curtains is rooting for you, but you need to do something for him as well. He needs fuel. He needs oxygen, and he needs glucose. Now, if you've heard any sort of learning study about children in schools, you know that blood sugar is essential to our ability to function and learn in our brain. He also needs time off. He needs us to sleep so he can recharge and refuel. And he needs life experiences that allow security and healthful practices. He needs those supportive life experiences to really get some good functioning going on. Some real basic things to help you understand how we're going to move forward is that most imperative connections are made by 3 to 12 years of age. So by 12 years of age, if you need to know how to follow through with something that you start, if you need to know how to dedicate yourself to something, if you need to know how to have positive social interactions, all of those things are developed and those patterns are developed by that amazing hippocampus by the age of 12. So this kind of really throws off our concept of you don't have your entire life sometimes to develop these things. Your brain is phenomenal, but it does have limits, and we want to understand that. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we move forward through this learning experience. One of the things to know is that although the brain is awesome and has so many capabilities, we're really going to focus on that functional basis and that structural basis that helps us to see different possible deficiencies and possible healing and treatment. So I look forward to seeing you in our in-person piece so we can really get deep down into this further.